Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Beyond the 80 podcast, presented by Neds. I'm your host, Dan Tallenty, and I'm joined once again by some of the biggest names right across the great game of rugby league to talk all the latest news and opinions and have a bit of fun along the way. I'm very lucky to be joined by three very respectable gentlemen today, in no order other than who I think will contribute most to today's podcast. Welcome to the show, Adam Pengilly from the Sydney Morning Herald.
G'day, Dan. Biggest names in rugby league. I'm not quite sure if you've hit the nail on the head with that intro. We're probably some of the smallest names in rugby league. But, yeah, what a time to be alive, isn't it? Thank God the footy's going to be back, hopefully. We're counting down 4 weeks. 4 weeks from tomorrow.
4 weeks from tomorrow, indeed. Not that I imagine anyone is applauding out there listening to the podcast, but if they are still applauding, make sure you keep that applause coming. Welcome to the show, NRL.com journalist and fantasy extraordinaire, Chris Kennedy.
I was wondering who was going to be next. I've jumped ahead of the other guy who we're about to hear from. It's very flattering, Dan. Thanks for having me on. Unlike your other two guests, I've been stood down on annual leave this whole time, so I'm bouncing off the walls and ready to talk some footy and hopefully contribute something positive other than playing video games.
Well, finally, we're joined by a man who promised me he featured in the background of the Test documentary on Amazon Prime for a grand total of 3 seconds. AAP, Scott Bailey, welcome to the show, mate.
The sad thing about that was it was probably at the most chaotic point of the World Cup, and I was just standing in the background of my phone talking. So looking very unbusy at the time.
But that is true. You are in the background of the Test. Great series on Amazon Prime if you haven't watched it already in isolation.
It is very good, actually. It is. Hey, calm down.
Well, gentlemen, certainly a big week so far in rugby league, and it's scary that it's only 9 o'clock on Wednesday as we record. I guess probably before we dive into the news, and there's been a fair bit of that to get through, I guess what have you made from it all on the surface so far? I guess it's been a pretty, a big week in terms of news, some lot of positive stuff in terms of the schedule, length being determined and that sort of thing. But I guess what have you made of this week first and foremost? Is it just another crazy week in rugby league, Adam?
Absolutely manic, Dan. I worked on Monday, and that was the day after the Latrell and Josh Addo-Carr stuff sort of came to the fore, and it was crazy. I think we had a story on our Sydney Morning Herald website that was running obviously from early in the morning. I updated it, I think, probably 5 or 6 times throughout the day before about 3 or 4 o'clock with just all the developments. On the positive front, we've got some clarity about when we're going to have some football, Dan, which is great. I think May 28 is fantastic to see football back on our screens, but it's hard to ignore the negative headlines from some of the social distancing breaches from some of the players in the past week. I don't know what you guys think, but I was absolutely staggered with the NRL's response and the penalties they handed down yesterday. I thought they were going to be much harsher, to be perfectly honest. The suspended fines, yep, that's going to hurt some of the players, but given that a couple of these guys are some of the highest earning players in the game, I don't think they're going to worry about it too much. What really would have mattered to them was taking games of football away from them. And Dan, you work with guys, the footy players, day in, day out. I don't think nothing hurts them more than sitting on the sidelines or in the stands watching their teammates play. And I really thought the NRL missed a trick there yesterday.
Yeah, certainly kind of pretty big, as you say. And I guess there's probably pretty mixed opinions on that. I guess it's probably the whole range of ideas of what it was. Phil Gould was quite prominent in saying it should have been a season-long suspension and that sort of stuff for those guys. I think Andrew Abdo was really clear yesterday that the biggest thing they want it to be is, a learning curve for them and something that they're kind of not punished for the rest of the season. I guess, Scott, CK, I guess that was probably the big kind of talking point up until the schedule kind of dropping late last night. I guess what did you kind of make of this week so far?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at it and I thought, if you look at the canvassy opinions of ex-players or people around the game, I don't think anyone suggested that they would avoid bans. So when footy players are saying that people should be suspended, that's usually a pretty good sign that that's what should happen, because generally speaking, they tend to go on the lighter of punishments as far as what they recommend. I take Peter Landy's point that they currently aren't under the care of their clubs, so therefore maybe clubs shouldn't be punished. It should be the players who are punished, and that's why it's a mandatory fine. But I mean, the reality is it's not good enough to say that these guys, weren't being regularly told or educated by their clubs, as to what the rules are, because you'd have to be living under a rock not to know what the rules are as far as, isolation goes. It's not like, I don't watch the 6 o'clock news, or I don't read the papers, I don't know that I can't, go camping with 12 blokes or have 8 people in my house. I mean, anywhere you go, it literally, if you look at your phone, it literally on mine says Telstra #stay home. So we all know there's no excuses.
Yeah, I agree. I was probably like you guys, surprised there wasn't going to be any ban or any football missed. I think calls for, a full season suspension are a bit over the top and probably a bit emotional, which I know we're all sort of, feeling a bit under threat if the games don't come back. And I see why people were particularly let down, but I guess I don't think the leniency will continue, especially if someone else flouts the rules once the games are back on it and puts the competition at risk. But yeah, I agree. Surprising that there was no ban at all. But Andrew Abdo, from my experience in being in a few meetings with him, seems a very pragmatic sort of fella. I don't think anyone would question Peter V'landys' sort of, conviction or strength from what they've seen of him so far this year. So I think maybe the whole competition can consider it a warning shot, and if there's further breaches, it might not be the same result next time.
Yeah, Seiko, probably just on that, I was just going to quickly ask you, I guess, from being at NRL.com for a little while now, you've probably had a fair bit more to do with Andrew than a lot of the guys and journalists so far in the game. I think the biggest thing for me that always comes across with him is he's just so level-headed, kind of not flustered in a time, which is exactly what you want from the CEO in what is a really uncertain time for the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I was pretty happy when I heard that he was going to be the acting CEO. Like I said, I've been in a few meetings with him. I'm not, when I am working, I'm not based at Moore Park. I'm out at Everleigh with the other digital types, but I've been in a few meetings and certainly financial briefings where he's been there with Todd and, spoken to him a few times, and yeah, you nailed it. He's extremely level-headed, extremely pragmatic. He's not going to be, prone to any kind of, emotional decisions guiding what he does. I think he's going to be an asset to the game, whether that's long-term as official CEO or just in a short stint as acting CEO until someone else is found. But yeah, I've certainly found him to be very level-headed.
Awesome. Well, as we said, certainly a big week of news for rugby league, and it is only halfway through. We're going to jump right into kind of all of that and get the latest on this schedule coming back, the 20-round season, what that means for the grand final and Origin travel. There's a whole bunch of things for us to dive into, and we'll get stuck into it right after this.
That's a win. This NRL season, take it to the Neds level.
You're listening to the Beyond the 80 podcast. I'm joined by Adam Pengilly from the Sydney Morning Herald, Chris Kennedy from NRL.com, and Scott Bailey from AAP. Gents, Tuesday afternoon, we got kind of our first big bit of news that we were waiting for in terms of the schedule. Obviously, been quite a back and forth and public matter with both Channel 9 and Fox meeting with the NRL around a schedule length. While we don't have the draw yet, Adam, we do have confirmation of a 20-round season. I guess, what does that mean, and kind of what stood out to you from that announcement yesterday?
Well, first of all, Dan, rugby league's going to be going deep into October, isn't it, with the grand final basically on the last weekend of October. I know that I work for a newspaper that's owned by Channel 9. It's been well documented that Channel 9 wanted a much shorter season, but I'm a fan, I must admit, of the season going into October. I've always found that October can be a little bit of a dead space for sporting media. It's really a real estate up for grabs in some respects. You do have your horse racing and major spring carnivals in Sydney and Melbourne really take flight throughout the month of October into early November. But the international cricket season has changed a lot in recent years. It doesn't really kick off to sort of late October, November. I think that October month is going to be fantastic. I'm not saying it's going to be a permanent in the future, but I think rugby league can get a lot of exposure, some really good airtime by the grand final going through to the end of October. I'm fascinated to see what they're going to do with these extra 5 rounds, because everyone's going to have to play each other once, 15 rounds. How are they going to work the extra 5 rounds? Like, they're going to weight it so the teams aren't playing, say, all the top 4 teams from last year in those extra 5 rounds. For you guys at the Tigers, they're talking about rivalry rounds. Do you play Penrith? Do you play Parramatta? Do you play the Dogs in those extra 5 rounds? I don't know how it's going to work out. That's one thing I'm interested to hear about.
Yeah, they're talking about rivalry rounds. You've got, all the obvious ones like, Melbourne could have Cronulla and Manly, and Parra could have Penrith and the Dogs and such forth. But what do you sort of do with the Warriors and the Titans and even sort of Canberra and a few teams like that? I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being a little bit more like the draw that we already have, where the extra 9 games on top, you play everyone once, then 9 teams you get twice. If it just ends up being sort of luck of the draw. And some poor teams are going to get, Melbourne and Roosters twice, and some teams will get, Warriors and Titans twice, and that's just how it'll land. There might be a bit of a focus making sure that those, Cowboys v Brisbane and those sort of games do get some extra attention. But I feel like with 5 games, it's too much to do the whole thing with, rivalries and that sort of thing. It's such a big piece of work as well, the draw. Like I've written stories in the past about that Canadian company they use to put the draw together, and there's just so much that goes into it in terms of, like, to say that there was 1,000 trillion combinations would be a comically small number compared to how many there actually are. Like, it's inexpressibly large number of potential combinations that these supercomputers filter through, and with the draw needing to change, it's going to become a big piece of work, even with only sort of 5 extra rounds on top of everyone playing each other once. That it's going to come down to, I guess ground availability is going to be, less of a factor than it usually would be, and stuff like that with other sports not back yet. But obviously you got to account for AFL and Cricket World Cup and stuff potentially coming back late in the season as well. So with so much going into it, it might just be doing the best that they can.
I'm only speculating too, but I guess that they don't need to play, like, they could just be like a normal draw. We don't need to play 15 rounds and then have 5 extra rounds where teams play each other twice. I mean, that they can work these games in however they like during the season. So what would be interesting is whether there's or how, I guess, what the disparity is as far as free-to-air games for each club. It's often quite big anyway between, say, Brisbane and Canberra or the Gold Coast, but could it be even bigger now because the broadcasters have driven this? And my guess is of those extra, I guess the extra 5 games per team, will they just be worried about the 3 games that are on, your Thursday night, your Friday night, and your Sunday 4 p.m. Make sure they're the marquee games, as they always are, I guess. And then what the other 5 games are for those rounds, it doesn't really matter as much because they're not your Channel 9 games, so to speak.
The other thing that's interesting for me is you look at some of those early season afternoon games in March before daylight savings kicks in, those 4 p.m. games, and some of them are just swelteringly hot, and you're having drinks breaks, and you can see the sweat just pouring off the players. It's it's a physical enough game at the best of times at Shark Park at 8 p.m. in July or August, let alone in Brisbane at 4 p.m. in March. I'm wondering, stretching the competition into October when it genuinely starts to heat up again, if that might be a factor at the back end of the season. Might have to introduce drinks breaks. Maybe we're going to have to, from, say it's a 20-round season, from round 14 or 15 onwards, do away with any 2 p.m. or those early type kickoffs and only sort of have evening games if it's going to start getting really hot as well.
Do you think we're likely to get a Monday night fixture back again?
It would depend on negotiations with the broadcasters, but if you go Thursday to Monday, that creates massive headaches with 5-day turnarounds and fitting the draw in, getting teams through week to week without any, really harsh turnarounds. So, if it was desperately needed as a financial option and a sort of a barter card sort of thing, then maybe, but I'd be pretty surprised just with the extra strain it places on the draw and the short turnarounds.
Have we heard yet, guys, anything about when we're likely to get that draw? I think Andrew Abdo had mentioned hopefully something this week. Is that what we're hearing there?
I think probably a week or two, Dan. They're looking at getting the draw out. So I'd say clubs will probably be back at training by next Monday, and there still won't be a draw released. But I'd be surprised if it wasn't released by the end of next week. That's my understanding anyway. I suppose when you take out the ground availability, which is always a massive conundrum for the NRL balancing, they're probably not going to have that much of an issue. You wouldn't have thought for this rejig draw, because there's not exactly going to be crowds and different codes playing as well. So they shouldn't have as much issues with that. So I'd say within the next week or two, you'll probably get some more clarity on that.
I wonder too if they'll leave, and I'm only speculating here, but maybe the venues for the last few rounds might not be locked in or something like that, just because obviously we know that realistically between now and say August there aren't going to be crowds at venues, so they can play them wherever. But I guess the NRL is probably hoping by September, October that they might be able to get some crowds. I think it's unlikely, but I just wonder if they'll sort of leave a few things open as far as that stuff goes. They obviously won't be able to say what the grand final will be until later on, until we get confirmation from the ICC as to where the Cricket World Cup goes ahead. And I know the ICC and Cricket Australia, they're talking August. They might make a decision on that the latest. So there's probably a lot of things that could still be left up in the air.
Well,
I think
I was going to say, Dan, if there's no crowds by October when the grand final rolls around, you've just got to move it to Bankwest Stadium, don't you?
I think that's what had kind of been mooted yesterday anyway. If that, like Scott was saying, the ICC weren't comfortable with moving the Cricket World Cup from the SCG, then it would go to Bankwest. Seems to make most sense to me.
Yeah, I don't see the World Cup going ahead anyway, to be honest. There's no way in the world that the ICC can get 16 teams out here for a Cricket World Cup. But they're still trying to make it happen.
You speak of travel, I guess. Do we have anything yet, CK, that we've heard kind of around the Queensland or Melbourne clubs moving up at all, or how that will work for their schedules?
Yeah, with the state quarantines, it's going to be a challenge. The last I heard, the Queensland teams were hoping to base out of Queensland. As far as I'm aware, Anastasia Palaszczuk and the Queensland government are still sort of looking at the NRL's proposal and working out whether that's going to be feasible. You'd probably anticipate talk of Melbourne being based out of Albury or somewhere around sort of the southern part of New South Wales. I've heard obviously Warriors coming over to be based in Tamworth, which hopefully the bit of space up there in the country lets them train while they're still quarantining when they come over. And even Canberra's got quarantining for ins and outs, doesn't it? So they might need to skip the border as well for the duration.
I think Canberra, you can still go across the border, but the last we heard from their chief minister, which is effectively their premier, was that they were going to follow the rules of the other states, which is interesting because there's no real clear uniformity on that as it stands. So even that, there's question marks over whether Canberra can still train there, and play there.
Yeah, I was going to say on the Warriors, obviously we have that confirmation that they're likely to be based out of Tamworth there. I think probably topical West Tigers, we've been there the last 2 years. Have either of you guys come up? I'm sorry for not remembering. Any of you three come up for that game?
Yeah, I did one, yeah.
It just seems like, for me, I think it's a great idea in terms of that facility is, just that Scully Park is a ground that works certainly more than capable for an NRL team to train on. That hotel is 100 metres across the road. You can walk straight there. But then you're talking, I think it's the Mercure there. It's a perfect hotel. It'll inject some kind of much needed excitement back into town that, we've got to remember was doing it really, really tough with the drought only a couple of months ago. I think they were up to level 4 or 5 water restrictions. So for me, it kind of seems like it's a great answer to kind of, I think it's better than that Lennox Head solution.
Do you let them play games there, Dan? Do you think the NRL will be considering letting the Warriors play a couple of games out of Scully Park? Because let's be honest, they're already at a massive disadvantage as it is. They've been in lockdown over there in New Zealand in a lot harsher lockdown laws than what we've had over here in Australia. And now they're going to be travelling to Sydney, Brisbane, wherever to play games from Tamworth pretty much on a weekly basis. Do you give them a couple of games in Tamworth?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the thing I'd worry about is, I know, so West Tigers, our game against Canberra there has been cancelled. That obviously won't be different draw, but that wasn't going ahead in terms of a location. I wonder if they kind of just don't want 8, 9, 10 teams coming in and out of Tamworth. I know we can be, fairly confident with the way that we're quarantining and isolating teams, but I guess if you can kind of limit them to Sydney and kind of not have 8 or 9 teams travelling to Tamworth, if it's just that Warriors team coming in and out, then maybe that's safer. I'm not too sure. CK, Scotty, what do you think?
I was going to say, I don't know what the expenses are associated with country games for the broadcasters, Channel 9 and Fox, having to ship, cameras and production staff and commentators and everything like that up to whether it's Tamworth or someone else. And they might, they're already copying a financial hit out of all this. Maybe they're just going to sort of dig in and say, just play everything out of ANZ or Bankwest or whatever it is, just to sort of save them on the cost front. So that might be another potential hurdle.
Yeah, I know we spoke to the Tamworth Mayor yesterday, and he was very keen for the Warriors to be there and for sport to be there, and was very keen to accommodate them. But yeah, I think CK is right there. The costs of Dan, you'd probably know this answer better than me, but I remember someone telling me once that how much it costs for games to go out to the bush from a broadcaster perspective, and it's in 6 figures, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think it's fairly substantial because it's not living remotely.
Which is why, we'd all love to see more football in the bush, but realistically, that's part of the reason why we don't see games going out anymore. Because I know, going off topic, we used to talk about how the NRL should just have, every team has to play a game in the bush each year. And obviously the Tigers have done really well with that. But part of the reasoning was that it just costs so much to enforce that because of broadcasters. So, yeah, I can't imagine a time where the game is losing money and you're not going to get the advantage of having crowds and extra business into the town. I can't imagine it'd be worth that cost, I guess.
Changing tact a little bit. It's never too early in a rugby league season to talk about Origin. That's the rule, right, gentlemen? We've had confirmation of Origin in terms of a series being played at the end of the year. I guess probably a question for all of you there. What does this mean in terms of the schedule? What will that look like? Is it likely they'll play it over 3 weeks and they'll kind of go into a camp for that time? Has anyone kind of heard anything on that?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most likely scenario, Dan. And just going back to your point about it's never too early to talk about Origin, I remember someone asking Trent Robinson in a press conference, I think it was after round 1 or round 2, about one of his players' suitability for Origin. You should have seen the eyes. The eyes are for the question. So it's never too early to talk about Origin in our minds, but not in the coaches. I think it'll be 3 consecutive weeks starting on the Wednesday, 10 days after the grand final. And then they'll work it out. I'm intrigued to see how Freddie and Kevy are going to handle their squads, because there's going to be a lot of guys who play for clubs that don't make the finals. They're going to want to be a part of their Origin plans. How do you keep them up and training for another 5 or 6 weeks to get ready for Origin? It's not easy. I think the NRL's done the right thing. It's the only place you can put Origin basically in the calendar, given the extraordinary circumstances we're in. But I think it will be that sort of that bang, 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 that 3 Wednesdays in a row period. Yeah,
that's the absolute top thing that I thought of when they said postseason Origin is, and especially say hypothetically that, the Cowboys and the Titans both missed the finals, which is, a realistic possibility. And Queensland might be picking, you look at all those Jai Arrow and Jared Wallace and then all the Cowboys guys, Michael Morgan, you might have, a third of their squad or more not having played in 4+ weeks. Whereas if New South Wales, if you got, Souths and the Roosters and sort of the bulk of their squad might be actually playing into the finals, and it could go the other way as well. You could have, the New South Wales team, the bulk coming from non-final sides. I'm not saying it has to be New South Wales with the advantage, but you might end up with one of the 2 states having a much bigger chunk of its squad not having played in 4+ weeks compared to the other one. I agree with on the schedule too. I'm just thinking potentially to get a 10-day break in, if they might go Wednesday, Sunday, Wednesday over a 1-month period. So stretch it out that 4th week with sort of 10-day gaps, just given the intensity of Origin and how physical they are and how emotionally and mentally draining they are. Just use that 1 extra week to sort of make it 10 days between games rather than 7.
Not to harp back to the Cricket World Cup again, but let's just say it does go ahead.
We get it, Scott. You're in the documentary, right? We get
it. But that is a potential problem for the NRL, because so if we're saying Origin starts a week and a half after the grand final, which is November 4, which I think we're all expecting, there is a T20 World Cup semi-final that Channel 9 have the rights to on November 11, which is the following Wednesday. So until the Cricket World Cup is called off, you'd think Channel 9 wouldn't want a game on that day. Likewise, if we were to have the 10-day gap between games, that would mean the second Origin would be Sunday, November 15. That's also the grand final for the T20 World Cup, so which Channel 9 again has the rights to. So I don't, until the Cricket World Cup is called off, I don't think it's a very simple task for the NRL. We might have to see Origin played on a different date, or Wednesday or a Sunday, and it might not matter if we don't have crowds. That is a bit of a spanner in the works for the NRL, I think.
On the flip side, Scotty, to your point about the Cricket World Cup, if it does go ahead, the final being scheduled on the Sunday, why couldn't Channel 9 push for the Origin to be played on Saturday night? And have sort of a bumper sort of weekend of sport, Origin on Saturday night into the T20 World Cup on Sunday night. They've got to think outside the box, obviously, with the current circumstances. It's just one of the options that I thought they might have been considering if the T20 World Cup does go ahead.
No, that's a big possibility. And the other thing with that too is, I guess, I'm pretty sure, in fact, I'm very certain that one of the semi-finals for the T20 World Cup is in Sydney. That would be the SCG. So again, if we've got crowds at that point, it would again mean the Origin would have to be played at Bankwest, you would think, not the SCG, which the whole idea of playing Origin in November to get crowds in, all of a sudden you go from a normal 80,000 crowd at ANZ Stadium to what's Bankwest all 30?
30,
yeah. Yeah, so you're right, Adam. I think, it probably would. You're right, they might have to go a Saturday night Origin in that case.
And I think too, just on that crowd point, I think that's a big plus for having Origin at the end of the year. I mean, we all, know that that 50,000 at Suncorp, 80,000 at Bankwest, at ANZ, whatever we were getting at the MCG or at Perth, at a high price ticket is certainly bringing in a lot of money for the game, the stadiums, governments, tourism as a result. So the ability to put it as late in the year as it can, hopefully by then our social distancing measures are at a point where we're comfortable to have that back. I know we're talking 6 months down the track, but this could kind of be a huge win for the game financially that couldn't happen if Origin wasn't pushed until the end of the year. And you'd have to think that played some sort of a part in that decision to put it at the end of the year as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's such a big financial hit for the game to lose all the Origin ticket sales. What is it, 80 odd thousand at ANZ or 50, 52 at Suncorp, whatever it is, times that by, what's it average out to, $100 a ticket or something? It's absolutely massive cash injection to be saying goodbye to if you can't have crowds. So yeah, I think you're right. The later the better in terms of hopefully, and even if I've heard suggestions of, say it's at ANZ and you have a crowd of 10 or 15,000 and they're all spaced out sort of thing, or whatever it turns out to be. I don't know how realistic that is, but it's certainly been a suggestion. It'll be better than nothing, definitely.
I know we touched on it earlier. Obviously, certainly a fairly prominent talking point in the game in the last 48 hours around players breaking the isolation rules. Obviously, we saw the punishments and the fines handed out yesterday, and it kind of seems that that's sorted now and done, and I guess we can kind of move on from that as a talking point. I guess the question for me is, we talk about that if players break the isolation rules, it impacts the game further. I guess, what do they kind of mean? What do people mean when they're talking about that? Like, is the game kind of genuinely in danger of not going ahead if players continue to not follow through with these isolation rules?
Yeah, put it this way, Dan. I'd pose the question to you: if there's a second suspension of the season because of a coronavirus outbreak, do you think rugby league gets back up again a third time this year? I can't see it happening. I really can't. So I just think there's so much at stake, as everyone's been pointing out. These protocols that are being drafted up at the moment by the Project Apollo committee and have been sent to the clubs in draft form over the course of the weekend. I'm fascinated to see how they're going to work, because they seem to be really, really stringent, and they need to be. But how realistic are they? That's the other question I want to ask. In terms of an enclosed training environment, a football environment, I think they're all fine. But from a day-to-day living basis, about no visitors in your house, full stop at all, which is okay. That's fine. If you want to go down that path, that's fine. But not even being allowed to, at this stage, I think they're trying to get some more clarification. The players walking around the block with your dog, or taking the kids to the park for some exercise for half an hour to play with them. I don't know. I hate to say it, I can see maybe one or two missteps coming up in the next couple of months, but I really hope there isn't. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out.
You just look at the demographic of players, and it's it's young men, it's guys in the early to mid 20s who would, in normal circumstances when they're not training or playing, would love to go out and have a beer, and obviously very popular with the fairer sex for the most part. It's a big ask to say to stay at home and go under more strict quarantine sort of rules than the general population. But what's interesting to me is that we're so used to seeing players who step out of line, they're letting themselves down if they're involved in an incident, and to an extent their teammates. It's now, if they step out of line, potentially putting the entire game under threat. Players from other clubs, staff from their own club and other clubs, all the extraneous people who work in the game potentially losing work if one or two players do the wrong thing. It's the most serious sort of set of circumstances you can think of. If someone does do the wrong thing, you'd have to think that the education and just drilling it into everyone's heads is going to be over the top, even compared to what they usually get, which is pretty constant and pretty thorough.
I'll tell you one thing. They're not, I know the NRL are going to have spies and, ways of policing this, but they don't have to search far for spies, because general public will absolutely dob in a player as soon as something goes on. I mean, it was quite funny, actually. I tweeted something about, obviously the media copped a bit of flack about the coverage of Latrell and Josh Addo-Carr, and I said, well, if NRL players were Coogee over the weekend and they put a selfie up on Instagram about that, we would definitely be reporting that as well. And I woke up yesterday morning to probably 15 or 16 screenshots of people had sent me of players they thought were breaking rules, most of which I'm very certain weren't, because they were photos from March 8, or they were, brothers of players who don't have NRL contracts, so what's it matter? But, if people are already screenshotting that kind of stuff now, you can imagine that if player X walks out the front door to take his bin out and someone drives past, they'll probably take a photo and try and, get a story out of it. So the point is that I think that, it will definitely pop up all the time. I can't imagine a way we're going to go through this season without people, without players finding themselves in some kind of breach of these rules.
Well, that probably segues us nicely into our big question for today. Which player or players will benefit most off the back of this break we've had in the competition as a result of the COVID-19? Obviously, certainly it's been a challenging time for everyone, an uncertain time for, let's talk big picture here, not just rugby league, the world in general. And look to the positive. I'm sure there's a number of players that will benefit from this break and having that extra bit of time. We're going to have a little short break, and then we're going to come back in and answer that big question right after this.
That's a win. This NRL season, take it to the Neds level.
Big question for today. Which player or players will benefit most from the COVID-19 pause in the competition? Gentlemen, you've each had some time to think about which players will kind of, use this time to their advantage and kind of come back better for it. Does anyone have a name they want to kick us off with?
Dan, I've got 3 names. Am I allowed to give you 3 names?
You can. Can we throw out your 3 and then we'll have a chat about them?
Okay. Kieran Foran, playing for his career, the extended break to get his shoulder better, I think is going to help him with an extra month of the season. Valentine Holmes had a very short preseason with the Cowboys. I think it gives him another couple of months to get his body back to a shape that he wants it and work on his skills and his fitness. And the last one, I'm being a bit facetious here. I think this guy will be a very good player for you this year, but is Joey Leilua. Do you reckon Madge has made him watch his defensive effort against Newcastle every week for the last 2 months?
I might throw that one out to the floor rather than jumping in on behalf of the club, if that's all right. Thank you, Adam.
Yes, I think he has.
Let's run through those. Kieran Foran, I guess that's probably a fairly common one. Did anyone else kind of have that written down? I actually had that down on my list.
Yeah, it was on my list as well. So, I mean, you could have had, a dozen or more injured players who are going to miss 8 or 10 fewer weeks than they would have otherwise. But I think Foran's a good one in particular, just because of, like Adam said, the contract year. He's had, every season since he's come to the Dogs, he's had serious injuries and missed footy. And when he did his shoulder playing for New Zealand, he was probably going to miss all of this year. And then it was kind of like, he might be back mid-season. He might get a run to sort of, stake his claim. And now with his shutdown, his recovery's going well. He might actually back. I don't anticipate him playing round 3, but he could be back pretty shortly after that. So he's gone from missing all of 2020 to potentially playing most of it, which is a massive turnaround in obviously a very important year for him.
I don't know about you too. I always just feel that little bit more sorry for players and clubs when they get injured playing for representative. Like it just seems like such an extra kick in the teeth for them and for the clubs. I think it was Josh Hodgson got injured playing for England, and he missed the first half of that year for Canberra, and then he came back. Unfortunately, it was against West Tigers, and he came back and literally single-handedly won the game. But like you see the impact that players like that can have, and certainly I think Foran's a great shout there. Adam, your other one, Valentine Holmes, you went 2 for 2 off my list. I think Valentine Holmes is going to be a huge winner from this. I just can see him just another month to not only that kind of 6 weeks of just training and getting his fitness up, but also this month in May of just another month training with the team. I just think, he showed enough in those first 2 games for the Cowboys that he's certainly still a very, very quality player, and I think he's only going to benefit more from this time.
Yeah, I agree. I think I just marked him down as potentially the buy of the season. I know it's not being a rocket scientist, given what he's achieved in the game previously, but I think we just saw little glimpses in the first 2 weeks, as you mentioned, Dan, without a really complete performance. And I think you're 100% right. The next 3 or 4 weeks training with his halves, with the spine, with the group will help him enormously when he comes back in round 3.
All right. Now, just before we move on, the last one you said on that list there, Joey Leilua, why did you say him, mate?
Because I think he's got the potential to be awesome for the Tigers this year. We saw glimpses like Valentine Holmes in the first 2 games, what he can produce. It was just a defensive effort. He needs more time to work with his brother Luciano and Benji on that right hand side to get their just get the communication and get their thought process a little bit better. I saw Newcastle just relentlessly going down their left-hand side to attack that edge, and they had heaps of success. So he can obviously improve enormously defensively with a bit more work with those guys. And I think it can be a great buy for you guys, but I'm just fascinated to see what Madge has sort of been getting in his ear in the last month or so.
Yeah.
I think, very, very fair comment. And I think certainly a strong performance from Mitchell Pearce and Kalen Ponga that day, who I'm fairly confident will destroy not only the West Tigers right edge, but a few teams this year. CK, Scotty, any other names that you'd want to throw out there that you kind of think will benefit from this break?
Yeah, I've got. No, you guys.
I really should have done. That's poor hosting on my part. I really should have picked one person, and clearly we'll go to the journo that I respect more. So CK, mate, any names that you think will benefit most?
Yeah, I've gone for a trio of Roosters players because they were obviously they're 0 from 2. Everyone's a bit surprised they started the season so slowly. They're now with a shortened season as well. 0 from 2 is a little bit worse in a 20-round season than it is in a 24-game season. So they're going to need to pull their socks up once they get back. The 3 guys that I think might benefit. First one is Josh Morris, who had pretty much only just signed the contract when the season got shut down. He wouldn't have even had a training session with his teammates, I don't think, when the competition got called off. He's not a guy that needs to learn, how to play centre. He's one of the elite players from our game over a long period of time. He's used to going into rep camps and playing with different players. He would have played with some of those Roosters players, but it's more just getting around those new teammates. And, the Roosters defend in a very certain sort of way, and they sort of pin the edges out wide, and they slide well. So, the chance for Josh Morris just to get back with his brother Brett, who plays for the Roosters. The club's obviously lost, Latrell Mitchell in the off-season to Souths, and then Billy Smith at his ACL. They need someone like Josh pretty badly. So for him to have this sort of extra bit of time to slot into their systems and get to know everyone, I think will be good for him and for the club. Second one was Kyle Flanagan. I don't think he's he's obviously a talented young player. I don't think he was particularly bad in their first 2 games. He's obviously, no one's asking him to be Cooper Cronk overnight, but potentially the chance to work with Cooper if he's still around the club and sort of get a bit more polish into his game might help the Roosters when they come back. And the last one's Boyd Cordner. I was mostly trying to steer clear of injured players. We never really got clarity around what's wrong with him or why he was left out of those 2 games. There was talk from the Roosters of just a bit of load management. I've never heard of someone being load managed in the first 2 games of the season before. There must be something wrong with that knee, but hopefully the extended break has given him a chance to get that right, keep the the extra load off it for a while and come back fit and strong. And I think potentially it's not really anything to do with the delay, but the origin being at the end of the year could probably help Boyd through the season as well. It's taken a huge toll on him through the middle of the season, captaining New South Wales and so on. So could be potentially good for him as well.
Yeah. Any thoughts on those 3 guys? I think certainly fairly good reasons. I think Josh Morris in particular is a big one. I think you look at that chance to now he's not going to need time to get up to speed with his brother. He's certainly capable of kind of starting straight away and forming that combination. But it must have been so tough for guys that missed those first 2 rounds. We're expecting to come back in round 3. I think of West Tigers obviously had Moses Mbai injured in the trial, expected to come back in round 3, and you kind of then awaiting. Obviously, we had the Harry Grant, Paul Momorowski swap deal that was all set to go ahead, ready for round 3, and then the comp got put on hold, and it must have just been so frustrating for those guys who were expecting to play in round 3. All right, Scott, hit us. What have you got, mate? What? Bring us home with some big names here. I'm looking forward to this.
I've got the 2 biggest names in the game, mate, but 2 left field ones. I actually think Cameron Smith and Benji Marshall. I know people say, well, hang on, look at their age. But if you look at round 1, I can't count the number of times that I've written, ageless veteran Cameron Smith, proved that the off-season was no concern for him, best player in the game in round 1. And likewise, Benji Marshall. We saw what Benji obviously did for your Tigers down in Wollongong in round 1. Geez, he was very good. And I think that's probably 2 or 3 years in a row that he's done that in round 1 now for the Tigers, that he's probably been their best player in the field in the opening round. It defies logic because theoretically, the older you get, the tougher it should be to restart. But these guys just have a knack of just doing it straight off the bat without much match practice every single year. And in terms of Cameron Smith, he probably plays for a team that I think will have the biggest benefit out of essentially restarting a season, because they haven't lost a round one game since 2001, I think it is. They certainly haven't lost one under Craig Bellamy. It just shows that they know how to do a preseason, be it a 4-month preseason. I mean, they're quite used to having shortened preseasons too, because they play a grand final, then half their team goes away and plays for Australia and comes back in January or mid-January for an early March start. So I know it's a bit different, but I just think that Melbourne, I'd expect them to win in round 3, just like they always do in round 1, and then they don't have Origin affecting them like normal. So I think the whole season sort of plays into Melbourne's hands a bit in that sense too.
I think it's a fair shout. I think it's interesting the point you make on Melbourne being a big winner there. I think probably Cronulla's another one that I think will really kind of enjoy this break. I think, we talk about it from an injury point of view. You're looking at Wade Graham, Britton Nakora, Bronson Cherry, Josh Dugan, Matt Moylan, and I'm sure there's others that, all carrying niggles. All of a sudden you can kind of get those guys back, freshen up. And we've just named potentially 5 representative players there. I know Bronson Cherry's a little young, but the others are all certainly, in that representative frame. And to have those guys back is a huge boost for them. I think kind of any clubs that can get those key players back, Cameron McInnes at the Dragons is another one that kind of can all come back. That's such
John Bateman and Reid Marnie were both going to miss 8 to 10 to 12 weeks each, and they're both going to be probably not back for round 3, but pretty close to it after originally being out for months.
You mentioned the Sharks too. Former Tiger Andrew Fafita probably could have done with that bit of a break on his knees as well. Obviously, he certainly, I know it probably won't fix his problems, but I dare say an extra break hasn't hurt him at all in that sense. So,
yeah, very fair call. I might finish on Scott's point. You mentioned Benji Marshall and Cameron Smith. What does this break in the competition do? And let's be honest, all 4 of us on this know absolutely nothing about what both Benji and Cameron are going to do next year. And I would probably feel pretty confident saying that at this point in the season, neither Benji nor Cameron also know what they're going to do next year. Do you think that, or probably a bit of a broader question, what does this break do for contracts and players wanting to play on or retire? It's so complicated and messy, and you feel this is where kind of for players, this is really where it starts to affect their futures and their lives.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Dan. The whole contract situation is just chaotic at the moment. There's no other word to describe it, is it? It's just everything's on hold. A lot's going to depend on how the salary cap shapes up for next year. Now, are we going to be taking a hit on the salary cap? Are we going to be, reducing the salary cap by $1 million or $2 million because the game just doesn't have the finances or not? I'm not sure. Does that force guys like Benji and Cameron to make a decision earlier than what they would probably like to? We know that both Benji and Cameron left it till very, very late last year to make their call on whether they're going to play on again this year. And the clubs, obviously with the amount of respect and the status they've got within their clubs, afforded them that time to make that decision. I don't know if that'll be the case this year, to be honest, because clubs will be looking to restructure their salary caps right now on the premise that maybe it's not going to be as much as what they've budgeted for. So I don't know how it plays out. I'd love to see them both play on. I still think they've got plenty to offer the game, but it just depends where their bodies are and their minds are capable of going for another 12 months.
Yeah, I think if the season had been called off, then we would have seen, especially Cameron. I think Cameron definitely would have played on next year. Wouldn't have, he wanted that extra year of football, and they certainly showed enough in the opening 2 rounds that they could keep going. But I mean, even like Adam said, the whole salary cap, we don't know what that's going to be out for the next few years, and depends what value has been placed in the game by the broadcasters and what cuts are made elsewhere in the sport. So it's sort of hard to predict at this stage, but I think in terms of there are going to be some recruitment or some moves we see very quickly. Obviously, the Bulldogs got a few spots to fill. The Sharks need a backup hooker. Knights need a backup hooker. There's a stack of reserve grade players who aren't playing football now who will be looking for contracts, I guess. So I think we could see some very sudden movement as far as that stuff goes. And then it might be a bit of a pause until everyone reassesses and sees where things are for 2021. And I guess, what decisions those kind of players do make.
I think we had Robbie Farah and Liam Fulton on a couple of weeks ago, and Robbie made the point that whatever kind of happens with people's contracts, you just hope that guys who are retiring and playing their last game, it's not in front of no one. I mean, guys like Darius Boyd who've played 300 games, Benji Marshall's the same, Cameron Smith, whatever, whether they play on, retire, and there'll be other guys that retire right around the league this year, as always. You just, for their sake, you just hope that their last game isn't in front of no one.
Yeah, good point.
Can I throw a left field solution, Dan? If that does happen, we don't have any crowds later this year. What about a testimonial at some stage early next year if we are allowed to have crowds to honour those guys?
All the retirees.
Yeah.
I love that, Adam.
It might be another way to bring in some more revenue to the game.
Oh, what a solution. Let's just play it at Scully Park, I reckon, as well.
The broadcast course might put us out of action there.
I love that, mate. I can't wait to read that on Sydney Morning Herald come, what do we say, October 26th. That'll be great, Adam. I'm looking forward to that.
Drafting the story now.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time today. Certainly it's still a big week to come in rugby league. For those of you that are filing in the next couple of days, anything we should be looking forward to reading? Here's your chance to get your plug in. Have you got anything?
Wait till I make some phone calls. I'll let you know in a few hours.
Okay.
Do it very early in the day. I guess we'll know more about the biosecurity measures by the end of the week. I think that's the big movement for this week, and also exactly what's going to happen with the Warriors and remuneration for them and whatnot. I think that's what we can look for the rest of this week. But exactly what that's going to be, we probably can tell you in about 4 hours' time.
Okay. Well, we'll do a follow-up pod with you exclusively, Scott. Looking forward to that.
It'd be very long and boring.
And CK, mate, anything we're expecting from you soon, mate? Obviously, back on deck soon. It'll be good to have you back.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm keen to sink my teeth into something. I think I'll be doing sort of one shift a week through May, which is nice. Then hopefully back to, ideally full time, but if not full time, then 3 or 4 days a week once the season starts back up again. So looking forward to tearing into some hard hitting stats and analysis pieces, all that sort of good stuff that you're used to reading from me over the years, Dan.
That's what we need, mate. I need my fantasy
stuff.
I need my fantasy goodness back. I've got some big questions.
I just got made the host of the Matty Elliott the game plan show, and I got 2 episodes in with me and Matty Elliott on camera with the telestrator and drawing on the screen.
Lovely. Yeah,
got
nice.
2 episodes in, and the thing shut down. So we're
nice.
getting back in the studio with Matty once we're allowed to be within 2 meters of each other and so on.
Fantastic, mate. We're looking forward to that. Well, gentlemen, thank you for your time today, and thank you to everyone for tuning into the Beyond the 80 podcast presented by Neds. As always, keep rating and reviewing on iTunes, listening and subscribing on Spotify, wherever else you're getting your podcast. We really appreciate that. Gentlemen, have a wonderful rest of the week. And to everyone, we'll catch you soon next time on the Beyond the 80 podcast.